It was that look again, not angry, not loud, just one quick glance, cold enough to freeze your worth without saying a word. I don't remember the lights above. I don't recall the exact shape of the floor tiles. But I remember the feeling, that moment when you're judged, before you've even opened your mouth, when silence is louder than rejection, when a smile feels more like a wall than a welcome. Danica just wanted to buy her husband a gift, not for his birthday, not for an anniversary, but for 20 years. 20 years of quiet service, 20 years in uniform, 20 years of never asking for anything. He never expected thanks. He never needed praise. But this time, she wanted to give him something that spoke louder than words. A gift of respect, of dignity, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Not to show off, but to show love, in silence, in strength. She came prepared, appointment booked, documents printed, financing approved. She showed up on time, dressed well, not to impress, just to not be dismissed. But it didn't start with paperwork. It started with distance. That space people create when they don't want you close. That tone wrapped in politeness, but sharp underneath. The Phantom line might be a bit too much for you. He didn't shout. He didn't insult her. He just removed her without lifting a hand, like wiping away a speck of dust from a polished table. Danica didn't push back. She didn't explain. She didn't even sigh. She closed her folder, nodded once, and walked away. Her steps, calm, even, each one louder than the showroom deserved. She didn't cry in the car, didn't shake, didn't break. She just typed a message. It happened again. No punctuation, no details. He didn't need them, because Marcus understood. This wasn't the first time. And this time, he wouldn't respond with words. Because some answers don't come through speeches. They arrive with 4 wheels and park right where silence once stood. Have you ever felt it? That moment when a room tells you don't belong? If you have, then you'll want to hear what Danica did next. Danica didn't wake up expecting trouble. She didn't plan to test anyone's patience or pride. She simply wanted to buy a car. Not for herself, for Marcus, the man who had given his youth to the military, who served his country without ever asking it for anything in return. This gift wasn't about luxury. It was about dignity. It was about saying, "You matter," without having to speak the words. So she did what anyone would do. She booked the appointment, filed the paperwork, got pre-approved, picked her outfit carefully. Something simple, elegant, intentional, but not attention-seeking. Because when you walk into certain rooms wearing the wrong color, you don't get a second chance to be taken seriously. Danica arrived early. She always did. Early meant no one could say she was late. Early meant prepared. Early meant safe. She sat in her car a little longer than usual. Not because she was nervous, but because she knew sometimes it wasn't about whether you were ready. It was about whether the room was ready for you. Inside, she gave her name. The receptionist didn't ask how to spell it. She just nodded slowly, like the name itself was unfamiliar or unwelcome. Danica took a seat, waited. Another couple came in, white, relaxed, unbothered by the weight Danica carried just by sitting there. They were greeted with laughter, smiles, a warm, "Can I get you anything to drink?" Danica watched. Not with envy, but with knowing. Some doors don't shut in your face. They just never open to begin with. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No update, no apology. Just a quiet lobby and the quiet decision to keep her waiting. She adjusted her coat, checked her folder again. Everything in order, everything perfect. But sometimes perfection isn't enough. Sometimes it never even enters the conversation. Marcus had warned her once. You can do everything right and still not be invited in. That memory lingered. And when the manager finally appeared, Danica already knew how this would go, not because of what he said, but because of how long it took him to say anything at all. He offered no handshake, no welcome, just a question that wasn't really a question. "You're here to look at the phantom?" And then, that sentence, the one that stuck. "It might be a bit too much for you." No loud rejection, no open insult, just a soft suggestion designed to push her out without ever touching her. It was gentle, polished, cruel. Danica didn't argue, didn't flinch, didn't ask why, because deep down, she already knew. Sometimes the world doesn't have to slam the door, it just waits for you to leave on your own. And so she did, with her folder still neat, her posture still tall, and that same quiet dignity they had tried so hard not to see. Danica didn't cry when she got home. She didn't slam doors or call anyone to vent. She just sat at the kitchen table and said what happened. That was it. No drama, no trembling voice, just facts. And a silence that filled the rest of the room. Marcus didn't interrupt. He let her speak, and when she finished, he simply asked, "What's the name of the dealership?" Danica hesitated, only for a second. Not because she was unsure, but because she knew what that question meant. Coming from him, she answered. And he didn't say anything else. He just nodded once. Then stood up and walked to the other room. Nothing loud, nothing reckless, but Danica knew he wasn't letting this pass. Marcus was never a man of many words. But when he moved, things happened. He didn't post online, didn't call to demand apologies, didn't threaten lawsuits. He made one phone call. To someone who knew someone. To someone who owed him more than just a favor. And by the next morning, the answer was already on its way. No one at Westfield Motors expected a delivery that day. Especially not a delivery for them. But just before lunch, a flatbed truck pulled up to the front of the dealership. On the back, a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom, red interior, custom license plate that read, "For Melt, 20 years, no engine revving." No grand announcement. Just 4 wheels rolling over quiet concrete and stopping right at the entrance. People started looking. Customers stepped outside. Employees peeked through tinted glass. And then they saw him, Marcus, calm, composed. Not in uniform, not in rage, but in truth. He didn't walk inside. He didn't ask for Wyatt. He didn't say much at all. He stood beside the car they once said wasn't for someone like her. The car they never believed would end up in front of their showroom, without their permission, without their control. And after a long pause, Marcus said one thing. "Dignity isn't for sale, but you tried to take it anyway." Then he turned and walked away. No anger, no shouting, just footsteps, steady and unforgettable. Behind him, the Phantom stayed. Silent, present, unmistakable. It didn't need a driver. It didn't need a speech. It had already said everything. The Phantom didn't stay long. Just enough time for people to notice, for whispers to start, for the silence inside that showroom to feel a little heavier than usual. No press, no signs, just presence. And that was the point. Marcus never brought it up again. He didn't brag, didn't relive the moment. He came home, ate dinner, and asked Danica how her day had been, as if nothing had happened. But something had, not just at Westfield Motors, inside her. She felt it later when she was alone. In the kitchen, staring at the empty teacup in her hands. That strange mix of relief and sadness, because for once, someone had spoken for her, done something she'd spent years learning to swallow. There was a time, long before Marcus, when Danica was just 21, still in college, still too polite to take up space. She had gone to a high-end store with a friend, wanted to buy a simple silver necklace. Nothing flashy, just something nice, for herself. The clerk never looked her in the eye, followed her around the store, kept offering cheaper items, even asked gently if she was just browsing. Danica had smiled, said thank you, and left. She never told anyone. She just remembered, and taught herself to be quieter next time. But years later, watching that phantom glide away from the dealership, something inside her rewrote that memory. The girl who smiled to be accepted? She was gone, and in her place stood a woman who had been fought for, not by force, but by presence, by quiet defiance, by respect that didn't ask for permission. That night, Danica sat with Marcus in the living room. No TV, no music, just the hum of the world outside, and the soft understanding between two people who had both learned, in different ways, what it means to be silent, and what it means to finally be heard. If you've ever swallowed your voice just to keep the peace, if you've ever walked away not because you were wrong, but because no one was ready to hear you, then maybe you'll understand what this moment really meant. Danica wasn't the only one with history. Marcus had his own. He just never talked about it. Not because he forgot, but because when you live through something long enough, you learn how to pack it away. Tight, neat, silent. Back when he was 27, still in uniform, still clean-shaved and full of belief, he had been stationed at a base in North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just a small-town airfield, the kind where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. He had walked into the local diner one morning, early, clean, on his day off. Sat down, ordered coffee. The waitress took his order, smiled politely, and walked right past him. 5 times. She served 2 other tables that had arrived after him, refilled their cups, asked if they were comfortable. Marcus sat there, hands folded, back straight, and waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. She never returned. He got up, left a tip, out of habit, not out of obligation, and walked out without a word. That afternoon, he went back to base. Didn't tell anyone, didn't complain. But he remembered, and from that day on, he stopped expecting strangers to see past their own filters. Danica never knew that story, not until much later. But maybe that's why Marcus understood her so easily. Why he didn't ask follow-up questions? Why he never said, "Are you sure?" Or, "Maybe it wasn't about race." Because he had lived that doubt, had swallowed that same silence. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't speak for years because no one ever spoke for him. That was the thing about both of them. They weren't loud, they weren't vengeful, but they remembered, and they moved with purpose. That phantom wasn't about a car. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about what they both had carried, quietly, for years, and what they finally chose to set down, together. Sometimes the strongest voices come from the people who've been quiet for far too long. Danica had always believed in being graceful, even when she was hurt, even when she knew she had every right to raise her voice. But something shifted after that week. Not loud, not public, just a quiet change that started inside. She started noticing things she used to let go. How often people interrupted her in meetings, how her ideas were repeated later by someone else and credited differently. How silence had never protected her the way she thought it did. She didn't explode. She evolved. At work, she spoke a little more firmly, asked for clarity when someone brushed past her point, held eye contact longer. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was just done shrinking. And the funny thing was, people noticed. Some admired it. Some didn't know what to do with it. But Danica no longer adjusted to make others feel comfortable. She had spent too long making herself small. Now, she was reclaiming space. Not just in the room, in herself. She never shared the phantom story publicly, never posted about the dealership. But people around her started asking questions. What changed? You're different lately. I don't know what it is, but it feels strong. Danica just smiled. Because some stories aren't meant for everyone. Some are meant to live quietly, as reminders that dignity doesn't need applause. It just needs to stand. Marcus noticed it too. In the way she carried herself. In the way she no longer hesitated when speaking truth. even when it was uncomfortable. And he never said it directly. But he looked at her differently now, not with pride, but with recognition, because strength knows strength, especially the kind that doesn't shout. We all come to a moment where silence starts to feel like surrender. And when that moment arrives, you either step back or you begin to step forward. It didn't take long for the world to test her. Change always invites challenge, and Danica was glowing differently now. She didn't ask for attention, but it found her anyway. It happened on a Thursday, late afternoon, the kind of day when everyone's tired, distracted, rushing through conversation. She was in the staff lounge, getting tea. A co-worker, a man who had always mistaken charm for permission, walked in. He smiled that smile. The one that assumes too much, that leans too close, that coats every word in something Danica no longer had patience for. "I heard you've been a little sharper lately," he said, pouring himself coffee. "Standing up straight, speaking out. What's gotten into you?" Danica stirred her tea slowly, didn't smile, didn't soften. "Nothing got into me," she said. "I just stopped letting things slide." He raised an eyebrow. "Things like what?" Danica turned, faced him fully. No heat in her voice, just clarity. "Things like that tone you just used. Things like how you think this is a joke. Things like men who test boundaries and act surprised when they're met with a wall." The room went quiet. Not tense, not explosive, just still. The kind of stillness that follows when someone speaks a truth that can't be undone. He chuckled, awkward, uncertain. "Didn't mean anything by it?" Danica didn't blink. That's the problem. She walked out, left him standing there with his coffee, suddenly too hot to drink. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was power, the kind that builds over time. That doesn't need a crowd to be real. And for the first time, in a long time, Danica didn't feel exhausted after standing up for herself. She felt ready. Because sometimes, the real confrontation isn't with others. It's with the part of you that's been too quiet for too long. Weeks passed. People forgot. The dealership moved on. The press never picked it up. But dignity doesn't need headlines. It lives in quieter places, like how Danica walked now, not faster but with more gravity in every step, or how Marcus looked at her in silence, as if he was seeing something she had built quietly inside herself. Not new, but finally, undeniable. One morning, Danica received an invitation. A community leadership panel. Local business leaders, young professionals, women of color. Someone had recommended her. She didn't know who, but she said yes, not because she wanted to speak, but because she had something worth saying. At the event, the room was small, modest, no cameras, just stories. When it was her turn to share, she hesitated. For just a second. Then she told them about the phantom. Not the dealership, not the insult. Just the moment, the silence, the stillness, the response. How her husband didn't yell, didn't write a letter, didn't argue. He just let truth arrive on wheels. Someone asked, "Did they ever apologize?" Danica smiled gently. "No, and that's not what I was looking for." That night, someone from the audience posted a quote from her talk. "Dignity is not given. It's remembered, in the way you carry yourself after someone tries to take it." It went viral, quietly, like a whisper that suddenly everyone hears at once. The dealership didn't say anything. Of course not. But for weeks, customers began to ask questions about how they treat people, about who gets to feel welcome. And that's the thing about moments like this. They don't scream. They don't demand attention. They ripple. They spread. They reach places you'll never see. Danica never told Marcus how proud she was. She didn't need to. He already knew. The way she stood now. The way she sat at the table. The way she no longer stepped aside so others could take space first. That was the answer. And it was louder than anything either of them had ever said. Some stories don't end with punishment. They end with clarity. And sometimes, that's more powerful than revenge.